she told her bridesmaid. I only said yes because he's rich, not because I love him, while I was standing right outside the door. The bridesmaid saw me and froze. I walked in smiling and said, perfect. Then you'll love the prenup, I just added. She looked pale. 48 hours later, her parents called me. The wedding was off. My name is James Fletcher. I'm 33, and for the past 10 years, I've built my own real estate consulting firm from the ground up. I didn't inherit money, nor did I win the lottery. What I have came from long nights, early mornings, and saying no to a lot of things other people my age called fun. So when Vanessa came into my life, it felt like a reward. I met her at a charity gala. One of those events where the champagne flows endlessly and everyone pretends they're not just networking. She walked in like she belonged to a different century. Regal, confident, and sharp. We were introduced by a mutual acquaintance. By the end of the night, she had me smiling in ways I hadn't in years. Vanessa was smart. Graduated from a top university. Worked in art curation, though she didn't seem passionate about it. What she did have was a deep love for luxury. I noticed it early. Every dinner reservation had to be somewhere that had a Michelin star. Every gift suggestion came with a brand label attached. At first, I mistook it for good taste. We got engaged after 11 months. Some friends told me it was too soon, but I didn't listen. When you've spent most of your life focused on building something, it's easy to tell yourself you deserve to grab happiness when it finally walks through the door. I thought she loved me, but something inside me never fully settled. There were moments, small ones, that made me pause. Like when she asked if I could upgrade the ring after we got married, because no one else is just one stone anymore. Or when she half joked about never needing to work again once we were married. I laughed along, thinking maybe I was just being cynical. Maybe I wasn't used to being with someone who didn't need to struggle. Still, I made sure to keep certain boundaries. My financial accounts remained mine. The house stayed in my name. When we discussed a prenup, she waved it off with a soft of course. But I hadn't drafted anything yet. I thought I had time. Looking back, there was a pattern. A carefully performed affection. She knew what to say, when to say it, and how to never reveal too much. It was subtle, not dramatic. But it was always there, underneath the surface, like perfume over something rotten. 2 weeks before the wedding, I began to feel uneasy. It wasn't cold feet. It was a whisper I couldn't shake. I told myself it was stress, the usual pre-wedding nerves. But something didn't sit right. Still, I kept moving forward. The invitations were sent. The caterer was paid. The suits were tailored. The final blow came when I wasn't looking for it. I had gone to the venue early to finalize some things with the coordinator. The place was nearly empty, just a few staff setting up lights. As I walked down the hallway toward the bride's prep suite, I heard voices. Vanessa's voice. And her bridesmaid, Jordan, I think. They didn't know I was near. Vanessa was laughing, lightly, the way she does when she's being sarcastic. And then, clear as day, I heard her say, I only said yes because he's rich, not because I love him. There was a pause, a silence that felt like ice water down my spine. Jordan didn't laugh. Instead, she gasped, and I heard her whisper, Vanessa. That's when Jordan looked up and saw me. She froze, completely motionless. I stepped into the doorway. Vanessa turned around slowly. Her face shifted in stages, confusion, then horror. I smiled. I don't know how I managed to. My heart felt like stone. Perfect, I said. Then you'll love the prenup, I just added. Her lips parted. No words came out. The blood drained from her face. I nodded politely, turned around, and walked out of the suite. I didn't say another word. As I walked out of that hallway, the weight of her voice still clung to me like cold fog. Each step away from that door felt like peeling back a layer of denial I had wrapped around myself over the past year. I didn't need her to say anything else. I had heard everything I needed. The words weren't taken out of context. They weren't jokes or sarcasm. They were a confession she never meant for me to hear. I drove home without music. The road blurred past me in long, quiet stretches. The world had suddenly become muted. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but underneath the surface, a new clarity was forming. It was a strange kind of calm, the kind that doesn't tremble or rage. It just moves forward with purpose. Once I got home, I sat down at my desk and pulled out the document I should have written months ago. The prenup. There had been drafts before. Outlines. Notes. Conversations with lawyers that never went beyond hypotheticals. Now it wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was essential. I didn't want revenge. I wanted protection. Not from loss of money, but from the slow erosion of trust that would have eaten me alive over the years. I had already seen the cracks. I just hadn't wanted to admit that they were widening. This wasn't about being hurt. It was about survival. About integrity. About not building a future with someone who had already made it clear that the foundation meant nothing to her. I sent the document to my attorney that night. I asked him to finalize it, ensure it was ironclad. and send it to her family's lawyer by morning. No drama. No explanations. Just business. Vanessa called twice that evening. I didn't answer. The third time, she left a voicemail. Her voice trembled, almost performative. She said she was confused and worried. She said she hoped everything was okay. There was no mention of what she'd said to her bridesmaid. No apology. No ownership. Just concern that something might be wrong, but not that she might be the cause. The next morning, her messages became more frequent. Longer. More emotional. She asked if something had happened. Said she felt like I was pulling away. Still, not a word about what I'd overheard. As if she could erase it by pretending it didn't exist. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on the details. I contacted the venue. I reviewed every contract. I spoke to my financial advisor. Everything was still reversible. Barely, but it was going to cost someone something. 48 hours later, I got the call I expected. It wasn't Vanessa. It was her mother. She introduced herself politely, with the clipped professionalism of someone used to getting her way. She said they had received the prenuptial agreement and had some concerns. She used the word excessive. She called it sudden. She asked if something had changed. I told her I was just being thorough. After all, it was important to protect both parties. She didn't say anything for a few seconds, then added that Vanessa had been very upset, that she felt blindsided, that she wanted to clear the air. But I wasn't interested in clearing the air. The air had been clear the moment I heard what she really thought of me. I told her mother that if they had issues with the prenup, they were free to walk away. That option was fully open. I ended the call before she could build momentum. That same afternoon, I received an email from their family's lawyer. Polite, measured, but firm, they were declining to sign. It wasn't a surprise, but it was a confirmation. Within hours, the wheels began turning. The venue called. The florist. The photographer. One by one, vendors were canceling or requesting direction. I didn't need to say much. I simply told them the wedding was being postponed indefinitely. That phrase did a lot of heavy lifting. Vanessa didn't stop reaching out. Her messages shifted tone, first confused, then apologetic, then angry. Still, not once did she reference the actual words I'd overheard. It was always about how I was reacting, how I was ruining something beautiful, not how she had betrayed the very core of it. Some part of her must have believed she could talk her way out of it. She had probably done that before, with others, in other ways. But this wasn't going to be one of those times. What surprised me was how many people quietly reached out in support. A cousin of hers messaged me on Instagram, said he had always thought Vanessa was playing a part. A friend of mine who had met her only once said he could never put his finger on it, but something about her eyes had seemed cold. These weren't smoking guns, just small echoes of the thing I had tried to ignore. A day after the prenup was declined, Vanessa's father called me. His tone was different from his wife's, more direct, less polished. He asked what it would take to make this right. I told him the only thing that would have made it right was honesty, and we had passed that exit a long time ago. I never heard from Vanessa herself again. Not in person, not through a long message, not with any kind of admission. Her silence told me more than anything she could have said. I was left with a few awkward loose ends, returning some expensive gifts, canceling a few travel reservations, informing some distant relatives that there would be no wedding. But it all felt procedural, not emotional. Like filing taxes after a job you'd already quit. There was no collapse, no screaming match, no scandal in public, just a clean, quiet unraveling. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The morning after Vanessa's parents declined the prenup, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because of anxiety or stress, but because my body had finally stopped resisting what my mind already knew. I wasn't getting married. And the strange thing was, there was no grief. Only clarity. The kind that feels sharp, but not painful. I made coffee and watched the city begin to move outside my window. Somewhere across town, a family was probably trying to figure out what excuse they would give for a wedding that would no longer happen. I didn't envy them. I didn't pity them either. They were managing the consequences of something they had tried to gloss over. The silence in my apartment felt clean, not empty. There were no dresses hanging in the closet. No piles of guest list drafts or floral samples cluttering the coffee table. Most of that had been organized by Vanessa from her parents' estate. In a way, she had staged everything like a production, and now the curtain was being pulled back. By midday, I had handled the final logistics. The honeymoon suite at the hotel had been canceled. The ring insurance policy was closed. My assistant had forwarded me confirmation emails for every vendor I'd personally arranged. There would be some losses, deposits forfeited, time wasted, but those were nothing compared to the years I might have lost had I gone through with the wedding. Vanessa's social media went silent. No new posts. No story updates. No clever quotes about love or happiness. That told me she was regrouping, strategizing, possibly drafting a narrative in which she could position herself as the one blindsided. I didn't care. I didn't scroll to check who unfollowed who. I didn't text mutual friends to see what she was saying. The truth was, none of it mattered anymore. The moment I heard her confession to her bridesmaid, the structure collapsed, and no amount of aesthetic polishing could salvage the foundation beneath it. What I didn't expect, however, was the sudden attention. A few days after the cancellation, I started receiving subtle inquiries. One came from a business partner who had met Vanessa once and wanted to know if everything was okay at home. Another came from a woman I hadn't spoken to in months, now offering to catch up if I needed a friend. It was then that I realized how visible the relationship had become. Vanessa had made sure of that. Lavish posts, tagged photos, hashtags about power couples. To some, we had looked like the image of success. That image had now fractured, and the world around us, even the quieter corners of it, had noticed. Vanessa's silence finally broke through a joint message sent by her parents. They claimed the cancellation was mutual, a decision made during a difficult period. The phrasing was careful, rehearsed, and passive. There was no mention of betrayal, no hint at accountability, just a distant acknowledgement that sometimes plans change. It would have been easy to respond, to set the record straight, to publish the facts. But I didn't. I knew the truth, and truth doesn't require defending. A week passed, and her name came up less. The vendor stopped calling. The lawyer closed the prenup file. My inbox became quieter. And then, one afternoon, I received a short package. Inside was the ring, untouched, polished, placed back in its original box. There was no note, just the weight of something returned, not as a gift, but as an obligation discharged. I put the box in my closet, not out of sentimentality, but because I wasn't sure what to do with it yet. It didn't feel like a symbol of heartbreak, more like evidence, something that had been part of a deal, and now simply held the memory of what almost happened. In the evenings, I found myself reflecting more, not on Vanessa, but on the ways people wear masks so convincingly that even the most observant person can forget they exist. She hadn't lied directly, not with words, but with omissions, with silence in moments that required sincerity, with affection that arrived only when seen by others. I remembered a dinner with her family, months before the engagement. Her father had spent most of the evening talking about legacy and wealth preservation. Her mother had commented on the importance of marrying someone who could elevate the family's profile. At the time, I had laughed it off. I thought it was just the kind of talk wealthy families tossed around like empty silverware. Now I realized it wasn't empty at all. It had been a blueprint, and I had been expected to follow it. The wedding cancellation didn't spark scandal. It didn't become gossip fodder on a grand scale. But within a certain circle, our mutual friends, her family's network, some of my business contacts, there was a quiet hum of speculation. People asked themselves what had gone wrong. They searched for signs they missed, and they came up with nothing, because Vanessa had never dropped the act long enough for them to see through it. Only I had seen behind the curtain, and I walked away from the stage before the final act. The day that should have been my wedding arrived with a dull sky and the kind of stillness that feels planned. I woke up early, not because of nerves, but because I was too aware of what I had narrowly escaped. There were no vows to speak, no champagne to raise, no ceremony to smile through. Just silence and relief. I went for a walk downtown. The streets were already buzzing with the weekend crowd, but to me, the noise felt distant. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the most important decision I'd ever made, not marrying Vanessa. There was no trace of her in my apartment. No reminders, no clutter. Her existence had always been carefully staged, even in private. A relationship built on presentation. But behind that image was a hollow core, and once exposed, it all fell in on itself. Around noon, I received a text from an old friend who worked in high-end event photography. He had been hired by one of Vanessa's cousins to shoot a separate engagement party, scheduled weeks after ours. I hadn't known about it. Neither had her cousin, apparently. The groom was someone new. That wasn't the shock. The shock was that the photos looked familiar. Too familiar. Same poses. Same dress. Even the ring looked similar. It was as if she had taken the template of our engagement, copied it, and tried again, with someone wealthier. The message ended with a quiet comment. She recycled your proposal story word for word. Same toast. Same venue. I stared at the screen for a long time. Some people don't change. They just rebrand. But the twist came a few weeks later. A friend of mine who worked in private finance forwarded me a thread from a closed business forum. It turned out Vanessa's new fiancé was under investigation for fraud. His family assets were frozen. Several of their properties were seized. Lawsuits were mounting. And the engagement? Quietly erased from her profile within days. She had traded what she thought was security for something shinier, and lost both. Vanessa's reputation began to fray. Her social circle, once obsessed with appearances, pulled back. No more invitations to gallery events. No more sponsored trips or curated photo shoots. Her name began to carry weight, but the wrong kind. Whispers of gold digging, of bad judgment, of masks slipping at the worst possible time. It didn't take long for her to start reaching out again. Not directly to me, but through old mutual friends. Soft suggestions that maybe we'd ended things too soon. Questions about whether I'd moved on. Hints at regret. I didn't respond. I didn't block her. I didn't rage. I just lived. And with every silence, I said more than any speech could. I kept my work sharp, stayed focused, and built more than just financial success. I built a life with no weak spots. No fraud. No facade. Vanessa, from what I later heard, moved into a smaller apartment. The kind without a doorman or valet. She started freelancing, offering lifestyle consulting to influencers who barely knew her name. She still smiled in every photo. But fewer people liked them. Even fewer believed them. On the day that would have been our anniversary, I took a trip, not out of spite, but to mark the line between what almost was and what actually happened. I stood at the edge of a quiet lake, watched the wind ripple through the water, and realized the best revenge isn't destruction. It's distance. Vanessa didn't lose a man. She lost the last person who saw through her and still offered something real. And that loss, it followed her further than I ever needed to. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.